Welcome to the Crow's Nest Horror Podcast, a podcast dedicated to bringing you nightmares through the horrifying stories written by people just like you. These stories can be found in multiple places, such as the Creepypasta Wikia and Reddit. This and all episodes of this podcast may contain depictions of extreme violence. This and all episodes of this podcast may contain depictions of extreme violence, explicit language, and content that may be unsettling for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, my dearest fledglings and full-growns, it is roosting time. I moved in with my boyfriend yesterday. We've been together for 5 years now, and we're old and wise enough to settle down and finally leave our parents' houses. He just turned 24, and I'm 22. He's the love of my life. His name is Jamie, and I couldn't be happier to be living with him. When we decided to make the leap, we spent about 2 months looking at flats and houses we couldn't afford to buy. So, renting was our only option, but the prices were astronomical. For our budget, we would have been lucky to get a box room and a stove. Jamie works for a local 24-hour fast food restaurant, and I'm training to be a teacher. The early stages of training don't pay much, and I owe a lot in student loans, so finances are kind of tough. We had almost given up hope until we found our flat. It was nothing special, but to us it was a palace. A spacious 2-bedroom apartment with views of a city park, a balcony, and local conveniences. It was in a tower block in a not-so-nice area, but neither of us had been wealthy growing up. We weren't fussy, just grateful to be together. The advert was sweetened by the deposit fee option and open-ended tenancy. The landlord was happy to sign a 5-year contract if we wanted. That sort of thing never happens in the city. We were told that along with no deposit, we would also have no inspections, but would be liable to pay for any damage when we ended the tenancy. I've never heard of anything quite like it. We knew that for our budget and location, we weren't going to get any better. We snapped the place up fast, not even bothering to view it. It felt like our only chance. Move-in day rolled around quickly, and yesterday we got the keys to our first home together. It was such a strange feeling. The day was chaos getting our stuff in and up in the lift. We were flat number 42 on the 7th floor. The items we couldn't get in the lift had to be taken up all the stairs by removal men. I think they were grateful we weren't any higher, but I still wish we had been able to give them a better tip. In the evening, we settled down on our second-hand sofa, given to us by a cousin of a friend, and we watched some TV. We smoked cigarettes on the balcony, looking at the park, and fell asleep on our mattress on the floor super early because we had no energy to put the bed together yet, and Jamie had work at a hideous time of the morning. We slept soundly last night. I felt safe and happy. I don't think that feeling is coming back anytime soon, and it's all due to the note I found this morning. I found it in the kitchen, having a coffee, hours after Jamie had already left for his early shift at work. It was in one of the cupboards that were fixed to the wall. There were a bunch of useful items from the previous tenant, spare keys to the flat, a set of tiny keys that locked and unlocked the windows, necessary for those with kids this high up, spare smoke alarm batteries, and a folded-up piece of paper. The note was handwritten with "New Occupier of Flat 42." in beautiful cursive on the blank side. I opened it up and sat down to read. I can't really describe it to you, so I'm just going to read it to you. Dear new occupier, firstly, welcome to your new home. I lived here before you for 35 years with my husband. Unfortunately, he had an incident at home recently that I'd rather not discuss that claimed his life. My sister has now decided I can't keep up with the demands of the property and has insisted that I move in with her and her husband. I was reluctant at first, but the stairs do kill me at my age, and without Bernie, it's filled with sadness. Anyway, you've lived here for as long as I have. It feel like a person that you know. You understand its personality and what makes it tick. I thought it was probably pertinent that I import some of that knowledge on you. It's a wonderful home, honestly. I've lived through the best and worst years, and leaving it behind is very emotional. But if you are to survive and get the best out of it, then there are some steps you need to follow. 1. The landlord will never bother you. He doesn't visit, call, or communicate in any way. But make sure to pay your rent in a timely fashion always. I have only dealt with him once in 35 years, and let's just say I never missed another rent day. Any repairs required, you speak to the agent that you rented the place with. 2. Do not use the communal lift between 1:11 and 3:30 a.m. Just don't do it. This step is vital if you're going to have a happy life here. It really is life or death. Don't do it. This has cost me and many others in the building greatly. And I would rather not elaborate on why you shouldn't do this. Just please don't do it. I cannot stress this enough. 3. When you hear the strange animal noises coming from flat 48, don't question it. Mr. Prentice lives there, and he's a lovely chap. Don't be afraid to say hello to him in the corridor or on the stairs. He's old school, so he never risks the lift. But whatever you do, don't check on him when you hear the noises. You'll know when you hear them. 4. If you've ever come across a window cleaner on the balcony, ignore him. He may seem like the nicest fellow you've ever had trying to sell you something at the door, but it's really best that you don't engage. He will go away if you ignore him, but he tries pretty hard in the first few times, so you'll need some resilience. Whatever you do, don't offer him anything. No money, no hot drink. 5. Don't leave food scraps out. Bin or refrigerate them immediately. If you have small animals, it's imperative you watch them eat and take away any leftover food immediately after they are done. This and Rule 2 go hand in hand. The things forage all day and seem to really love animal feed. You don't want them in your flat, I promise. You can leave what you want out between 1:11 and 3:30 a.m., so you may want to feed your pets then. 6. Don't communicate with any neighbors who claim to come from flats 65 through 72. These flats suffered a fire in the late 80s that devastated the whole floor. All the residents died in their homes. The building was mostly council-owned at the time, and they never bothered to renovate the flats. They've been empty ever since, but every now and again someone will knock at your door claiming to live in one of these flats and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed 2 extra security bolts to avoid these fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. 7. Simply, one for you here, keep a weapon in each room. Sometimes you follow all these steps and something still slips through the net. Better be safe than sorry. 8. The building has a committee that will try and get you to join. It's one of those neighborhood groups about improving living conditions for all residents. It's a nice group, and the lady who runs it, Terry from flat 26, is a fantastic neighbor. By all means, get involved. But I wouldn't recommend babysitting Terry's 2 children. She'll ask you, because the poor woman needs a break, but if you accept, don't say I didn't warn you. 9. Stray, hairless cats sometimes come and roam in the hallway. I know they're supposedly a special expensive breed, but they don't belong to anyone. They're mostly harmless, just don't pick them up. Not unless you see one of those neighbors that claim to live in 65 through 72. Then grab the cat and walk it inside with you. It'll burn your skin a little, but the cats are friendly, and I wouldn't want to see them hurt. 10. There's no way to fix the damp patch on the ceiling in the bedroom. Sometimes it will turn a deep crimson and look quite concerning, but please try not to be alarmed. It doesn't drip, it doesn't get any bigger, and it's been there as long as I have. The landlord won't budge on it, according to the agents. I flagged it many times. He even called the police the first night it changed color. But it was a waste of time, and it will be for you too. It's best to ignore it. 11. You can trust the postman. His name is Ian Flanders, and he's been the postman since before I moved in. He has his own key to the main door and delivers post to the door every morning at 8:54. You can't include everything here or it would become a novel, but if you have any questions, Ian will help you. 12. Finally, The first few weeks are the worst, but you'll feel like you've made a mistake. I'm sure if you're reading this, you already do. But you can get through the first few weeks. It really is a lovely block to live in. Every property has its quirks, and this one is a little extra special. But you can be truly happy here if you just take my advice. I wish you all the best. I really do. Yours truly, Miss Prudence Hemmings. I don't know what to think after reading the note. Hopefully it was some sort of joke, but the agent had said the previous tenant was an elderly lady, and I can't see anyone named Prudence Hemmings attempting to play a practical joke on someone they'd never met. There were also parts of the note I couldn't disprove. There was indeed a large damp patch above the bed that me and Jamie had already discussed reporting. No crimson, but it definitely existed. I also had commented on a beautiful Sphinx cat roaming the halls as we were moving in. I started to get seriously freaked out. Our dream, our beautiful little home, had just become a source of fear and confusion. I checked the time and it was 9:14. Damn it, out of time to catch Postman Ian. When I opened the door to check, sure enough, 2 letters addressed to Miss Hemmings sat on the doorstep. At 11:15, my worst fears were truly confirmed when a friendly, middle-aged looking man carrying window cleaning equipment knocked on my balcony door. I ignored him. I didn't want to take the risk until I had spoken to Jamie and showed him the note. I texted him already to rush home. I felt bad as the man wrapped his knuckles against the door for over 10 minutes, but honestly, the longer it went on, the more I was terrified. The windows were sparkling, and due to our lack of curtains, I couldn't even hide from his gaze. I felt so exposed. He stayed for a total of 30 minutes exactly, and never once did he stop looking at me or knocking. He shouted the occasional ultra-friendly line or humble request for a beverage in the heat through the door, but I did my best to avoid eye contact. When he finally left, I looked outside every window in the flat, but I couldn't see him on any of the other balconies, or see any equipment suggesting he was around. He had vanished completely. Jamie still hadn't texted me back. He must be having a rough shift. It was a Friday, and they were always busy. It wasn't often that he didn't reply. He was due home in around an hour anyway. I read the note probably hundreds of times over. I tortured myself reading it for the next hour, desperately waiting for Jamie to come through the door and tell me it was all crazy and I should relax. I hoped for that so much, but Jamie never came. His shift should have finished around midday, but around 2 p.m., he wasn't home. I panicked, I cried, I left over 100 voice messages on his phone, but got nowhere. I finally decided it had been long enough that calling his work wouldn't embarrass him, and his boss told me he had never turned up for his shift. I thought about it. What could have happened? And then it hit me. Jamie's shift started at 4 a.m. today. He would have left the flat at 3:15. and taken the lift down the stairs. I don't know what to do. I've tried to convince myself it was all just a big joke, but maybe Jamie wrote the note and got his boss in on it? A voice in my head kept telling me that he couldn't write like that if he had tried, but I had attempted to make a fool of myself. It's getting late, and he still isn't home. What if it's all true? I think we made a big mistake. So much has happened in the last 24 hours. I'm so stressed, and I've barely slept since I discovered that Jamie was missing. It started making me feel a little twitchy, but I thought I'd better tell you guys. I was overwhelmed by all the suggestions that were given to me, and have taken more than a few of them on board. I'm definitely going to be getting a huge planter full of sage for the balcony, and I did spill a little salt in my doorway. I'm sorry to disappoint, but that didn't help at all. There's nothing I'm following quite like Miss Hemmings' rules. I followed them to the letter so far, and lo and behold, I'm still alive. That's not to say it hasn't been tough, as it started from the beginning. I was going crazy, and a few hours after my last post, Jamie still hadn't returned. He had been gone for almost 24 hours. His work has called me multiple times. I don't know what to say, so I just keep ghosting the calls. I was bang in the middle of danger time when I decided checking the lift had to be my first step, but I wasn't going to break that rule. I waited desperately for 3:34 to come, and I'm ashamed to say that when it did, I remained paralyzed to the sofa for almost half an hour before I found the nerve to leave the flat. It was 4:02 when I finally reached the lift. The lift in this building is old and rickety. It hasn't been updated in a very long time, and has likely been here as long as the building. Its big, clunky buttons stared back at me as I glared at them, hoping for some sort of answer or clue. My heart thumped, and I was overcome with a feeling of dread, but nothing came of any of it. It was hopeless. I stepped inside the lift, rode it up and down a few floors, and searched the entire perimeter with a phone torch for anything I could find. I found nothing. Jamie had completely disappeared. Sobbing and exhausted, I rode back to floor 7 and turned my key in flat 42. The perfect home. That felt anything but a home at that point. I sat at the cheap, flat, pack dining table we'd managed to put together on move-in day and cried, my hands shaking as I held my phone. I was flitting between reading all your comments and contemplating calling the police for an hour, but I decided to call my friend Georgia instead. I needed a real person here. Things were so crazy I wasn't sure the police would be able to help with what little information I had, but I knew I needed to sound it out with somebody. I'll spare you the details again, but I told her everything. She promised she'd be with me in the late morning. She said she had to take her younger brother to school. I waited anxiously, not before arming every room exactly as advised. Before I knew it, I looked up at the clock and it was 8:23. I had half an hour until the postman was due to show up. There was no way I was missing him today. I stood by the door looking vacantly at the wood, like someone in a film who was possessed. The exhaustion was really setting in. But Jamie was all I could think of. Pure adrenaline was keeping me standing. At 8:52 I opened the door. The next 2 minutes were the longest of my life. But when I saw him, a wave of relief swept through my entire body. Right on cue, 8:54, the postman Ian Flanders stood in front of me, a smile that barely hid his concern covering his younger-than-expected face. He didn't look old enough to have been the postman for over 35 years, but I was too distracted by the answers that I needed to care.
"You must be the new tenant,"
he stated, but in a way that sounded like a question. I struggled with my answer, so I got straight to the point. Miss Hemmings left me a note. She said to speak with you if...
"Can I come in, dear? I think we need to chat."
I ushered Ian in, my hands still shaking as I flapped them in the direction of the sofa, gesturing for him to sit down. I shoved the now slightly crumpled up note into his lap and waited.
"I'm glad Prue still thinks that highly of me. I will miss that old girl,"
he said with a coy smile as he reached the end of the note. "Can you help me or not?" I had no time for his ego trip over a moved-on neighbor.
"I can help, but I can't stop for long, so it'll have to be quick. I've walked these halls, delivering the post for 40 years. I've seen it all. Everything Prue's mentioned and more. What do you need to know?"
he said. Ian was nothing like I expected. The note made me feel like he was going to be a kindly old granddad-type figure, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Postman Ian spoke with a thick city accent and wore a heavy gold chain around his tattooed neck. He had dyed his graying hair polished black. His demeanor was thankfully non-threatening, but extraordinarily cocky. He was the sort of man I imagined in a betting shop, rubbing his grubby hands on notes as he bragged over a win. He didn't ask as he lit a cigarette in the living room. I didn't question it. We would usually smoke outside, but I wasn't going to argue over the technicalities. I grabbed a bowl for the ash and lit one too. Let's start with the things on the lift. My boyfriend is missing, and he took the lift at 3:15 over 24 hours ago. We hadn't gotten this note yet. I hadn't heard from him since. I need to get him back. I barked at him, as if the louder I spoke, the more I could influence his answer, but nothing prepared me for what he said. His skin turned pale and his harsh-looking face became more sympathetic as he explained.
He's dead, love. Forget about him now. Only one person has ever come back from the lift at that time of night, and it was Prue herself. After witnessing it, those creatures ripping their victim apart, poor Prue was traumatized. Your boy is gone. Let go and follow the rules.
He was blunt, but I could tell he felt sorry for me. There must be something I can do, I pleaded.
There are things I've heard to bring back those who are lost, but I've never seen solid proof they work. It would be irresponsible of me to tell you to do something that might get you killed too.
It's nice here, honest.
Just get over him and live with the status quo. Sorry if I sound harsh, I don't mean to, but you seem like a decent young lady and I don't want to see you go too soon.
I asked about what Miss Hemmings had seen in the lift and if they were sure it happened to all who entered it. I refused to believe that Jamie was dead. There had to be something I could do. And if I knew what I was dealing with, I could be better prepared.
It was awful what happened. I wasn't there, but this is what I was told. Little Lila was such a cute kid. She used to open the door and give me a tip when I delivered the post. She was Prue's granddaughter. Lila was her son's little girl, and that night she was staying over for the first time. Prue finally felt confident that she could protect Lila from all the strange things that happened here. She was wrong. Little Lila had a problem with sleepwalking. As she took a trip into the hallway at 1:30 in the morning, Prue took a little too long to notice the sound she had heard was the front door, and by the time she reached the lift, she saw the creatures dragging Lila's limbs away from her body. She tried to fight them, even killed one, but she couldn't save the little girl.
I was hysterical, imagining Jamie's fate. What are the creatures? Have you actually seen them? I asked.
No one really knows what they are, love. There's something to do with the building and all its quirks. No one's ever seen them elsewhere. We don't know where they came from, just that they're here. I've seen them a few times over the years, usually when new neighbors have left biscuits down for their cats or dogs or haven't disposed of food waste properly. They're curious little creatures, mostly harmless out of the hours Prue warned you about. But if they're fed, they can become quite vicious, looking for more food. That's why you have to bin all your scraps or hide them in a pack or whatever. Just don't leave them out and don't use the lift at those times, and you're safe from those creatures. They're a little smaller than humans, but they're a similar shape. They come with grotesque rodent-like features and are far larger than any rodent could be. Like rodent children, I suppose. They have 2 sharp rows of teeth per jaw and are consistently hungry. When they eat, they crunch down in a violent and disgusting way, dripping spittle everywhere. Prue said she could hear her granddaughter's bones shatter in those jaws.
He went pale at the thought of that, but continued.
When they first arrived in the building, there were hundreds. It caused pandemonium amongst the residents. We lost the residents of more than 30 of the individual homes, but the residents fought back and managed to kill but the strongest minority of them. These creatures left over were incredibly dangerous and seemingly impossible to eradicate, so the residents struck a deal that they be left unharmed and allowed to live in the building in return for the residents' safety at all times. But if anyone wandered into the lift between 1:11 and 3:33, they are fair game. This time frame is the period the creatures are at their most frenzied, and restricting them to the lift was safer for all parties. God help anyone who encounters them during those hours. They've been here ever since, claimed lots of unsuspecting people avoiding the stairs, but nothing like when they first arrived. A few got put down for not holding up their end of the bargain, but we haven't had an incident outside of the lift in years. Count yourself lucky you missed that crisis. Everything here's been pretty peaceful right now. I'm sorry about your boyfriend. I really have to go. I'm late for my round.
He scrawled his phone number on a bit of paper and handed it to me.
Emergencies only. I don't like to be bothered.
You can't go. The note said you would help me, I exclaimed.
And I will,
he snapped back.
When there's something I can help with. I can't resurrect your boyfriend, and I don't like to be late delivering the post. I will see you soon, love.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. and I couldn't believe he was leaving me after the information overload and the small ray of hope he had lit inside of me, and then squashed. "I'll call the police," I shouted, desperate to feel as if I was solving this somehow.
"You can try if you want,"
he sighed as he opened the door to leave.
"It just aggravates the creatures, and it isn't gonna bring your boy back. Mr. Prentice hates it when police come too. If you want to get any sleep in the next week, then I'd avoid it. Wait a week, report him missing, and learn to adapt to the life here, love, or you'll be dead in days."
And with that, he shut the door behind him. I opened it again. I had so much more to ask, but he was gone. No sign of him anywhere in the corridor. Maybe it was just me losing my mind. I might be imagining all these things, but no matter how much I willed it, the note was still there, and Jamie still wasn't. Georgia arrived not long after Ian had left. I, of course, asked if she had seen him in the corridor, to try and affirm to myself that he was real, but she hadn't. She looked at me worried and held me as I sobbed and told her about the postman and what he said about Jamie and the creatures. I wasn't sure if she believed me. Even as she read the note, she looked skeptical. If she was skeptical, I wouldn't have blamed her, but she had always been supportive. She sat with me for hours while I just sobbed, heartbroken. I was so conflicted as what to do. It felt insane that I hadn't contacted anybody, but this note had turned out to be accurate so far, and if the postman was to be trusted, then I should wait. Georgia had been my best friend for many years. She had stuck up for me when I was too scared to do it for myself, and had always been the brave one of the two of us. I felt safe around her. So after hours of crying and despairing at the way my life had changed in a matter of days, I finally decided to take a nap. It was early evening and Georgia was watching some TV, just there for me if I needed her. Despite the deprivation, I struggled to fall asleep. I tried to imagine Jamie's arms around me, but it became a more painful reminder that they probably never will be again. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of staring at the damp patch on the ceiling, I drifted off. About 3 hours ago, I woke up, staring at the goddamn damp patch on the ceiling, and I could hear the chatting in the living room. I jumped out of bed and walked towards it. Georgia was on a sofa with a middle-aged looking woman, both nursing a cup of tea in matching mugs that Jamie had got me as a present when we moved in. My blood boiled, but it wasn't their fault. I cleared my throat to get their attention. "Oh, Katie, this is Natalia. She lives upstairs. We got chatting, so I made her a cup of tea. I hope you don't mind." I looked at the dark-haired woman on the sofa drinking tea from my cup and nodded. Georgia was a sociable idiot with no understanding of when not to be herself. I wasn't going to lament her for doing it right now. It was her coping. "Of course. Hi, Natalia. What flat do you live in?" I tried my best to be polite. I would have to discuss not bringing people into my home mid-tragedy with Georgia after she had left, but until then I would be neighborly.
"Oh, flat 71. It's so nice to meet you. You have a lovely home,"
Natalia responded, her lips curled at the corners into a smile that wasn't replicated in her eyes or the rest of her facial expression. She looked at me smugly, with full knowledge that I was aware of the implications of what she had just said. The rules. The flat number. Every now and again, someone will knock at your door, claiming to live in one of these flats, and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed extra security bolts to avoid these fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. Prue's warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't take my eyes off Natalia. Something really was off about her. I looked at Georgia, sat on the sofa next to her, and noticed her sweating. Anyone in the UK knows that it's been a hot few days, but this was beyond just the ambient temperature. Her entire body was dripping. Suddenly, she began to pant. Natalia's eyes were locked onto mine, just like the windows cleaners had been. Nothing happened before with the cleaner, except this time, the rule had been broken. She was already in the flat. Georgia started to scream as her skin blistered and charred. Her hair fell from her scalp as the skin flaked and melted away from every inch of her. She was being burned alive, without a flame in sight. She scratched frantically at her own melting face, digging into the exposed raw flesh. The sound a person makes when they burn alive is like no other. That will never leave me. I screamed and screamed, but no one came to my door. I tried to grab my phone to call the postman Ian, but the wooden surface I set it down on burned my fingers to the touch and forced me to recoil. She was going to set the whole flat alight. My actions needed to be quicker than a phone call. I grabbed a hold of the large knife I had set down on the side earlier when weaponizing. The handle blistered my fingers instantly, but I didn't care. I needed to get her out now and help Georgia if I could. I ran towards the dark-haired lady, sweat drooping from my brow the closer I got, and plunged the knife into Natalia's throat. She gripped it and fell to the floor. She didn't bleed like a normal human. Her insides were black, and she was still moving. I figured it probably wouldn't be long before she stood right back up and tried again, so I dragged her to the hallway, ready to bolt the door. As we reached the entrance of the corridor, one of the cats was waiting, hissing at the semi-conscious body. I caught her eyes fixate on it as I dumped her on the floor. I grabbed the cat, pulled him inside, wincing as its skin caused more burns up my lower arms, shut the door, and watched through the peephole. She got up, held her hand to the wound, cauterizing it, and walked off towards the lift, as if she hadn't been injured at all. I dropped the cat by that point, but every bit of naked skin it had touched throbbed and burned for at least an hour. Georgia hadn't been as lucky as Natalia with injury recovery. I anonymously called an ambulance for her. I couldn't believe it, but she was still breathing. She was badly burned, and her life wouldn't be the same again, but she was alive, and for that I was grateful. It sounds awful, but I left her at the park across the road from the building, with no phone or ID. She's my best friend, and I want to be there, but if I own up to involvement in injuries that bad, they'll suspect me, and I already lost the slim chance that Jamie might be savable. It doesn't mean I don't care about Georgia, but she's still alive. I won't believe Jamie isn't until I see it. So now I'm alone again, in the flat, conflicted about what to do. I want to leave so badly, but this was mine and Jamie's first home together. If he's alive and I can save him, then I want to be here for him to come back to. And if he's dead, and the postman is right, then I don't know if I can leave his memory behind. There's only one person I think that could help me right now, so tonight I'm going to do some research, hunt down an address, and tomorrow morning I'm going to visit Prudence Hemmings. I didn't get much sleep last night either. The lack of sleep is making me wonder whether all these things are happening in my mind or not, but I'm reminded every time that I see that damn note that it's real. I spent hours last night searching for anything I could about Prudence Hemmings. If she had lived in a big creepy mansion, I imagine she would have been easy to find. But as folks who live in tower blocks aren't so well documented, no one cares about our lives, no matter how extraordinary. I found an article about a missing person, Lila Hemmings. It suggested she went missing under the care of her grandmother while playing in the park opposite the flats early in the morning. Interviews with her parents stated that they had both disowned Prudence. Despite the many years that had passed, Lila's death/disappearance, her parents appeared to have remained unforgiving of Prue. There was no mention of her on either their social media accounts, and she appeared to have no involvement with the children they had acquired since. Searches for the Hemmings family in the local area were equally dead ends. I looked at link after link, desperate to find something, but they all started to blur into one, until finally I saw something. An obituary for Bernard Bernie Hemmings, who had fallen from the tower block in unexplained circumstances after being diagnosed with dementia months before his death. I was surprised it hadn't made bigger news. It had only been about a year. There were no details of where to find them, but his wife Prudence and her sister Bridget were listed as contacts to find out the details of the funeral. It's scary what you can do with the internet these days, but just with those phone numbers, I was able to put them into a reverse directory and find an address for Bridget and Tony Bishop, the sister and brother-in-law that Prudence was supposedly living with. About 4 a.m. I managed to get some sleep, but not much. I was back up and wide awake at around 7 a.m., planning my route and working out my day. I saw a post on social media made by one of her relatives that Georgia was identified and is stable. This loosened the knot in my stomach that has been present since I found the note somewhat. At 8:50, I opened the door to my flat, seeing postman Ian. 4 minutes passed, and instead of the postman, an elderly gentleman made his way down the corridor. He had a walking stick and kind eyes. In his free arm, he carried a small plastic bag containing a newspaper and milk. He smiled and said, "Good morning," as he passed. I smiled back. He reminded me of my granddad. I imagined him pulling cola cubes from his pocket for his grandkids and shushing them when their parents weren't looking. A little further down the corridor, the old man stopped and turned. He looked me dead in the eyes with a sympathetic expression and spoke. "No post on a Sunday, if that's what you were waiting for." He smiled knowingly, and turned to unlock a front door that, until shut, I couldn't see the number of. When I saw the door close and the number 48 boldly displayed above the peephole, I understood what Prudence had meant. Mr. Prentice did seem to be a lovely chap. I sat back in my flat and sighed, staring at the various tabs open on my laptop. At about 9:15, the knocking on my balcony started. The window cleaner was back. I didn't feel half as terrified as I had the first time. If anything, I was just angry. It took every ounce of restraint I had in my tired body not to engage with him, if only to tell him to fuck off. His genuine seeming request just irritated me. After about 20 minutes of being watched, the knocking started to give me a headache, so I grabbed a bag and left the flat. I decided there was no time like the present. If I was going to turn up on the bishop's doorstep looking for her sister because of the freaky flat she left behind, then I had to get it over with. If the address was old or the bishops weren't the people I was looking for, then I was going to look stupid, whatever time of day I went. And I couldn't take the window cleaner's eyes anymore. There was something about them that really makes you want to open that door. I looked at the lift as I entered the communal hallway and decided I would take the stairs. I couldn't stand to be in that small box that my partner had probably died very painfully in. My heart dropped into my stomach just at the sight of it. The stairs were as grotty as the lift. We'd taken them multiple times on the move-in day, but hadn't really taken it the same way as I could now. I thought about the rules and all the strange things happening in this building. I looked at the badly painted numbers on the wall as I reached each landing. Nothing in this building is simple. As I looked at the numbers 765554342G, maybe it was just the sleep deprivation, but my legs were in agreement with my mind that I had definitely just descended more than 6 flights of stairs. They'd glitched. I look at the dusty, poor-lit stairwell from the bottom. It seemed dark, despite the sun pouring in from the glass panel in the main building doors. The note never mentioned glitchy stairs. Maybe I really was losing my mind. As I turned to exit the building, a woman walked in. She was in her late 30s to early 40s and had 2 small children in tow, 1 boy and 1 girl. I guess they were twins. They were both incredibly blonde with deep brown puppy dog-looking eyes, and couldn't have been any older than 6 or 7. They were as close to identical as it gets in twins of different genders. I'm not a fan of kids, but they were super cute. The lady had a short bob haircut that got longer at the front. It was uniform and dyed a perfectly even auburn color. I knew it was dyed because her roots were blonde like her kids. She looked as tired as I felt, but she pulled herself together when she saw me, running fingers through the part of her hair that she must have missed, however early this morning she left. "Hi, are you visiting?" She opened, trying to make small talk. "No, I just moved into flat 42 on the 7th floor. I was just leaving, actually. Whereabouts are you?" I was desperate to go. I had fired myself up to see Prue, but I didn't want to be rude. "I'm flat 26. My name's Terry. This is Eddie and Ellie." She gestured to the small 2 children, hiding shyly behind her skirt. "Welcome to the block. If you ever need anything, feel free to give me a shout." "My name's Katie, but people call me Kat, too." "That's really nice of you. Thank you. I will. Hey, is there something wrong with the stairs?" I stopped myself before going into detail. "Nothing wrong. They just skip sometimes," she answered, shrugging. "Well, I'd love to stop and chat, but I actually really need to get going. Nice to meet you, Terry." I tried to work out what was wrong with the children as I stepped forward to walk away, still baffled by the stairs. "By the way, we have a residence committee. You should come to one of our meetings. They're every Tuesday in alternating flats. This Tuesday is at Molly Jefferson's place in flat 31. Come along. We'd love to have you," Terry suggested, waving me off. I walked out the doors after my encounter with Terry, feeling sick. Every minute in this place made the note more real. Every word jumped off the page and into my life, made it more likely that Jamie was really gone. I rode the bus from a stop not far from the flats. It felt like it took an eternity to reach the little suburban area I was looking for. A 5-minute walk away from the bus stop, I got off and I was staring at a quaint little bungalow belonging to Bridget and Tony Bishop. I knocked on the door. The lady who opened it was unsteady on her feet. She was probably in her 70s, with wispy white hair neatly scraped back into a bun, 2 strands hanging that just softened her wrinkled face. She wore a dusty rose-colored dress that hung just below her knees and smelled of stale cigarette smoke. "Can I help you?" she asked bluntly. "My name's Kat. I'm looking for Prudence Hemmings," I answered, stuttering slightly. Her eyes widened. "Why?" she asked bizarrely. "Is she here? It's private." The lady ushered me into the house and sat me down on a sofa. Within minutes, there was a cup of tea in front of me. She didn't say anything to me for a while. We just looked at each other. Then she finally broke the silence. "I wondered if you'd try to find me. It took a long time to decide whether to leave that note or not, but I decided that you deserved a head start. That's more than I ever got." The woman was Prudence. She was nothing like I had imagined. She seemed tough and hardened, and spoke with a mostly blunt tone. She contributed before I could answer. "Terry called me not long ago, told me that she had met the new tenant. She said you looked shaken up and said that my note may have not been enough. I did say I couldn't fit everything on there, and the stairs didn't seem too important. The committee wanted to organize a meeting with you on your moving in day, but I told them that was intrusive. The whole committee thing always seemed a bit excessive to me anyway." She spoke flippantly. "It may have been intrusive, but we needed a warning. We spent a night in the place before I found your note. My boyfriend had already left for work at 3:15 and taken the lift. He didn't know." I broke as I told her what had happened. Her face dropped, and so did my hope for Jamie. "I'm so sorry. I really don't know what to say. I thought my note would reach you in time," she mumbled, her face to the floor, refusing to look at me as tears streamed down my face. "He's gone, isn't he? I didn't want to accept it, but I spoke to the postman, and your face says it all. The postman said there might be a way I can have him back." I bit at her, devastated and angry. "He's gone. You can't have him back. What Ian is referring to isn't what you think. There's a way to get people back from the lift, but not as themselves, trust me. I learned the hard way. Once they're back, you can't reverse it. I'm sorry about your man, but he's gone forever. Don't dig into the other way. To be gone forever is luckier than that alternative." She still wouldn't look up from the floor. "What do you mean?" "I don't want to talk about it. I said in the note that there's things I'd rather not discuss, and I need you to respect that, or I won't be speaking to you at all. Now move on and ask me what you need to ask." Prudence cut me off. I decided not to push the topic further and moved on to some other things I needed to know. "What's the deal with Terry's kids? They seem sweet and normal." "Those little demon creatures are anything but normal," she answered, wincing slightly at the thought of them. "When she went into labor, Terry never made it to the hospital. They were the first children ever to be born inside the building, and with everything that goes on, it's like something's rubbed off on them. They're average children in the daytime, but they never sleep. Ever. Poor Terry hasn't had a day's rest since they were born. They also really love to steal the birds and rats they can find the cats playing with and torment them. Really annoys the cats." As she finished speaking, a hairless cat strutted out from behind an armchair across the room, meowing softly. It brushed its head up against Prue's exposed legs, leaving scorch marks where it touched. She didn't react. She reached down and stroked the top of its head, smiling as it purred. "And those?" I asked. Eyes stuck to her now badly burned legs. She chuckled, pulled out a box and lit a cigarette, tapping the top layer of ash into a small silver dish in front of her. She offered me one, and I took it gladly. "They've always been my good friends. I couldn't leave the building without bringing a part of home with me. This little guy is Damon. He's seen some things," she gushed, not taking her eyes off the cat. "But where did they come from? Why are they everywhere?" I asked, watching in disbelief as her burns subsided. It seemed impossible, but I looked at my arms where I had picked up the cat the night before, and there was no evidence it had ever happened. They didn't even appear sunburned. "No one really knows. They started to appear after the fire a few years after I moved in. It was rumored that they were the pets of the residents that burned, and that's why they had no fur, but I don't think that's true. I interrupted. I met one of those neighbors last night. She said her name is Natalia. She almost killed my best friend. You're crazy if you think your note was enough of a warning. I ranted emotionally. Look, girl, if I had made a song and dance about warning you, then you'd have thought me crazy and challenged the rules. You'd have been dead already. Be grateful you got anything I didn't. I had to work it all out. Your generation is so spoiled. She tatted in frustration at me. I was angry, but she was probably right. An elderly lady telling me rat-like creatures would kill my boyfriend in the lift would probably have gotten some laughs from me a few days ago. I stayed quiet and waited for her to calm down. After a while, she sighed and started again. I think the cats are the neighbors that burned. They've never meant any harm, and they hiss and run from the imposters that roam the building. Besides, there's no way there were that many cats living on one floor. The imposter people don't even match up with the residents that died in the fire. None of them look like or claim to have the same name as the dead. They just claim to live in their flats. I've met Natalia before. She left a bad scar on Bernie's leg from an incident we had. Nasty girl. Before the fire, there were CCTV, and there was a recording. Saved about 15 people marching into the flats and up the floor about half an hour before the fire started. It was the only evidence found. CCTV wasn't great in the 80s, so they were never identified. And the flames melted the relevant cameras, so nothing ever came of it. I think the people that entered the night are the ones that asked for sugar. I don't know any more than that, but if you avoid them like I said, you don't need to know more. They hate the cats. I hope your friend survives, but I've seen what those people can do, so maybe she was better off dead. Prue carried on stroking Damon. I watched the skin of her fingers melt and twist as they made contact with him. What happened to your husband? I asked the question so fast I didn't have time to consider that this was the topic she had already explicitly said she didn't want to discuss in the note, but I had to know. She scowled at me. I said I didn't want to talk about that, she hissed. I just lost the love of my life. I need some answers. What happened to Bernie won't help you. I know you'd think any deaths in that building would be down to the quirks, but this wasn't, for the most part anyway. Don't forget that we lived there for 35 years. Bernie knew the rules, we knew how to take care of ourselves, and have a happy life there. It was our home. I don't doubt that, Miss Hemmings. I'm sorry, I interjected. Bernie had dementia. It started about 6 months before he died and deteriorated very rapidly. Towards the end, he started wandering. The doctor said it was common, but in our position, it was incredibly dangerous. More times than I can count, I pulled him away from the lift just in time. Along with the wandering, he was forgetting the rules. He let that smug, awful window cleaner in 3 times. Thank the Lord for the big metal pipe I keep by the balcony door. Chased him out a treat. Not that anything stops him from coming back. I'm sure you're already acquainted. He left a bowl of food out for Damon at 10 a.m. I was shopping with Terry and a few of the girls from the committee, and when I came back, I found one of those awful creatures. Prudence started to cry. I put my hand on her shoulder in an attempt to comfort her. After all, I truly know how she felt. It was eating him, she sniffed, and steadied herself to continue moving my hand. I chased the creature away with the same metal pipe I had, the window cleaner, and pushed Bernie off the balcony. He was heavy, and I didn't want anyone to know what actually killed him. His teeth, she shivered. He made such an awful noise. It reminded me of Lila. I finished her sentence. I hadn't meant to. I was so invested in her story I couldn't help it. I gather you spoke with Ian then, she said, sounding resigned. I never meant to hurt that little girl. I loved her so much. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. Damon, who was now sat next to her on the sofa, shuffled closer as if to cuddle her. Haven't you ever been curious about getting her back? I asked, my mind turning back to the methods hinted at by both Prue and the postman. I miss Jamie so much. I'd do anything to get him back. Her face filled with a look of horror and shame. Of course I have, she answered, which is exactly why I'm telling you not to. But I couldn't let it go. Surely anything must be better than gone forever, I pestered. I wish I hadn't. Prudence, frustrated, stood up and gestured for me to follow. She led me outside to the back garden of the bungalow. At the back was a large shed. The kind people use for a man cave or summer house. It was pretty. The sun shone down on it, lighting up a few cobwebs in the corners, making them twinkle. Miss Hemmings was careful to look in both neighborhood gardens to ensure there was no one around before she unlocked the door to the shed. We stepped inside, and the first thing to hit me was the smell. It was putrid, like rotting meat. I looked at the floor and covered my nose with my hands. Staring back at me was a pool of blood. I followed the blood with my eyes as Prudence locked us in the shed. Then after I made it past the animal bones, I finally saw it. Just like the postman had described. One of the creatures was watching me from a heavy-duty metal dog cage in the corner of the shed. It looked reinforced, but still the metal had chew marks. Their jaws had to be strong to cause that. That didn't surprise me looking at it. Its rodent-like nose and beady, yet somehow human-like eyes were nothing compared to the two very visible rows of jagged, sharp teeth that lined each gum. Despite its small stature, it was terrifying. Prudence opened a drawer in a dusty cupboard across from the room and pulled a can of dog food out. She poured the contents into the bowl and passed the bowl through the feeding hatch. The cage had a safety feature, meaning the animal couldn't access the food until the hatch was locked from the outside. I was grateful for this. Prue turned to me and spoke. She brushed one of the two strands of her hair, framing her face behind her ear. Gesturing to the hideous creature, she said, "Cat, I would like to introduce you to my granddaughter, Lila." Today's first installment of this story was brought to you by an author called Newtown Jam. I highly suggest you follow their content if you enjoyed this piece. They can be found on Reddit. Thank you for joining us here in the nest. I wish you a beautiful day and a haunting night. If you wish to submit any stories or recommendations, you can contact me through the Crow's Nest Podcast at gmail.com. Again, many thanks to the people who do listen in,